Could we take roll? Tyler, you want to start, please?
Yes, Tyler DP, Bend MPO.
Omar Ahmed, ODOT. Bill Chen, Deschutes County Commissioner.
Ariel Mendez, City of Bend Councilor.
Tarek Rawlings, Deschutes County.
Kelly Kennedy, Bend MPO.
Barb Campbell, Bend City Council and Chair of the Bend MPO. And then how about online?
Chris Doty, Deschutes County Road Department.
The City of Bend. And Chris Doty from Deschutes County. Bob Townsend from Cascades East Transit. David Abbas from the City of Bend. And Corey Carr from the City of Bend. And Samantha Nelson from the City of Bend.
Great, thank you.
I think Alma from the City of Bend is also here.
Who's that? I'm sorry, I missed that name.
Alma Aguiar.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for being here today. And that will get us moving along. Tyler, will you talk about hybrid meeting guidelines, please?
All right. Quick, I hope everybody knows this. Those online, please raise your hand if you have a question. The meeting is being recorded. And with that, we can move on.
Great. Next, we have an opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone who would like to address the MPO Policy Board? I don't see any virtual or actual hands going up. So that will get us along to our next agenda item. I would look for a motion to approve meeting minutes.
I move to approve the November 15th, 2024 Policy Board draft meeting minutes as presented.
We've got a motion from Mr. Mendez and a second from Mr. Chang. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous. Thank you, everybody. And that gets us along to agenda item number 5, which is our annual financial report. And I bet that is why we have Kimala with us here today. Kimala, take it away.
Thanks, Barb. For everyone who doesn't know, my name is Kimala Lutz. I'm the assistant.
We can't hear you. I think you must be on mute.
Oh, interesting. How about now?
I can hear you, Kimala, so it's probably an issue in the room.
Uh-oh.
Hear you.
Oh, we can hear Tori.
Yeah, we
Thanks.
can hear Tori.
Weird.
Kimala, try again. Say hello.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
there you
Okay.
are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, that's
Sorry.
okay. So sorry. Technical difficulties.
No worries.
So I'll just start over. My name is Kimala Lutz. I am the Assistant Finance Director with the City of Bend. And my job is that I lead the audit process, and I'm here today to give you a quick overview of the MPO's audited financials for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2024. It seems quite a long ways away now, but there's a lot of work that happens in these 6 months to get all of this done. So some of you may know the MPO has an IGA with the city as their fiscal agent, which means the city performs all administrative and accounting duties, which include the annual audit. Moss Adams LLP is our audit partner through a contract with the City of Bend, and they also audit the City of Bend financials and the urban renewal financials as well. And so through that audit, the auditors check a multitude of things, check balances, make sure things are materially correct and presented fairly within the financial statements. And the auditors this year issued an unmodified or clean opinion, which is what you want to see. That means there were no material misstatements, and everything was presented fairly and properly. You'll be able to see the audit results on PDF page 5 or report page number 2 of the MPO financials. The auditors are also required to issue a report on compliance and on internal controls over financial reporting in accordance with Oregon minimum standards. That's something that the state requires. And there were no compliance issues, no non-compliance noted, and no material weaknesses noted either, which again is what you want to hear. You want everything to be no findings. I would recommend that for anyone who is interested and would like to know, that people read the MD&A of the financials if you don't have time to read through the full set. It does a really great job of giving a snapshot of the financial picture of the MPO, and these are located on page 9 of the PDF report. Overall, the net position for the MPO decreased by 577,000, mainly due to the spending of the COVID-19 grant funding that we received back in fiscal year 22, which was offset by some interest income that we received from those large balances sitting in that fund. The MPO's assets were roughly 1.5 million, which consisted of 89,000 for ODOT grant receivable, and then 1.4 million of cash and investments, which included the remainder of that COVID funding and also some state highway funding and investment income. Due to structural changes related to grants at ODOT, the MPO will continue to have a positive net position moving forward, and will most likely decrease or increase over the next few years. As some of you may know, a few years prior, the MPO used to operate on a zero net position basis, which essentially means our revenues equaled our expenditures, which is no longer the case. So it may look a little different than some of you are used to. So thank you all so much for letting me come here today and give you this quick overview. Are there any questions or concerns that I can answer?
Questions for Kimala?
What are the implications of not having to be a zero net starting balance or something?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Sorry, I'm just asking about what the implications of having a zero net starting restriction that we'd no longer have to use is. I mean, it sounds like, is this like funding starting balances or what is that?
Yeah, so basically what happens is your ending fund balance is any remaining revenues essentially that you have left over at the end of the year that roll forward to the next year, which is the remainder of all those grant fundings that we received in the past. A lot of it is that COVID-19 funding, the 1.5 million. It's mainly just tracking on our end that we have to do to make sure that we're properly accounting for and spending those balances properly. But there's really no disadvantage or advantage to having a zero versus non-zero net position.
Okay, thank you.
Just indicates that we have money left over.
Yeah, and the one thing I will mention too is that with the net position, you are able to earn interest income, which gives you a little bit more flexibility. There are no restrictions on that interest income that's earned, so it gives you a little more flexibility with what to do with those dollars.
We like that.
Yeah.
Do we have a policy on how that's invested?
No, not yet. I think it's something we can come back. Yeah, absolutely. We just learned about that just fairly recent, within the last couple of months. And so
Index funds and no cryptocurrency.
yes.
All right,
Haven't-
Kimala.
Been holding money in interest earning accounts.
No, rarely. No. We have a couple of times we've had a little bit, but now with the COVID funds, still some of those still sitting there. And then the other big change is we used to receive, or we would pass through STBG federal funds to the city of Bend and other recipients. Those are now state highway funds, and those are brought into our budget instead of in the past ODOT. The board would make the decision, and then there would be an agreement between ODOT and the recipient. We receive those funds now, and then we're passing them on to the recipients. And so we will have those funds sitting in our budget as well and be building interest on those as they, as we hold them before they get pushed out to the recipients.
Thank you. Kimala, thank you so much. We are continually grateful for this relationship that we have where we can use the City of Bend's excellent finance department for our little $3 million budget over here. We really do appreciate you.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your service over all the years. It's been much appreciated.
Of course. Thanks, Kimala. Have a lovely day. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Another clean report. All right, that moves us. Whoops, sorry.
This is slightly unrelated, but can I just ask for a refresher reminder about reserves for the MPO? Like-
We're gonna be talking about that in just a few minutes.
Right. Got it.
So just looking
To accept the fiscal year 2024 Bend Metropolitan Planning Organization Annual Financial Report.
second.
Excellent. We have a motion and a second from Mr. Mendez and Mr. Chang. Although any other discussion, questions? No, all those in favor?
Aye.
That is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. That moves us along to agenda item number 6, which is the fiscal year 25 budget resolution. And it accounts for an MPO staffing change. Tyler, would you please talk to us about this?
Yes. So, the city of Bend, or city of Bend, the Bend MPO, we do not have a policy on modifying our number of employees. And the budget that we are currently operating under was adopted earlier this year, assumed or was built on a 2.8 FTE
Right.
equivalent, so pretty small.
Up from what, was it 1.5 for a while?
It was one for a long time.
It was one for a long time. Then we got you a half a person.
Building that empire, and getting up to 3. So anyway, our workload continues to increase. We're seeing increases in some of our federal requirements, and we are going to be helping, particularly the city of Bend, as it works to meet some of the new state's climate rules. And so we are seeking to increase our FTE up to 3. So, a net increase of 0.2, and that would take Andrea Napoli from a 0.8 to a 1.0 staffing position. That estimated cost is about $21,000. And then we believe, both this fiscal year and going forward, we will have sufficient funding to cover that increase.
And can we meet this additional increase with existing personnel?
Yes,
Okay, good.
yes. Yes, we just be bumping Andrea from up to full time.
How does Andrea feel about that?
Well,
I noticed she's not here,
Like on one hand,
as we're saying she has to work more hours.
yes, I think on one hand, she's happy to be doing it. On the other hand, she's, working 4 days a week is
Kinda
pretty
nice.
nice gig, right? And so it's kind of, there's the trade-offs, more money versus, the free time. So, and I see Tori has her hand up.
Hello, everybody. I just wanted to clarify the question that asked whether we can cover the cost increase with existing personnel. The plan is yes, but right now our year-end projection, given the increase, is about $2,000 over our current personnel budget. Because personnel and M&S both are part of the program level budget, we can use available budget in one category to offset the other. So the thinking is that we'll have at least $2,000 in M&S or personnel savings that will cover our projected overage. Worst case, we'll take that $2,000 from contingency, but that's a super small dent in contingency and honestly unlikely we'd need to utilize it. But just wanted to clarify, on the off chance we do take an adjustment to you at the end of the fiscal year, it would just be that $2,000 overage that we're projecting.
It's M&S materials.
Materials and services. And so under
I'm
that,
sorry, yes, materials and services.
yeah, so we have internal costs, some internal materials type costs, but our consulting line item is also in there. And we very likely will have some unallocated consultant funds that can be moved from M&S into personnel to cover that $2,000 difference.
Does that require a budget adjustment?
I see.
Nope, it would only be if we have to utilize that contingency category, but we can utilize materials and services savings for personnel without a budget adjustment.
The $21,300, those are fully loaded hours, all benefits, taxes.
Yeah, that's
what have you.
salary plus benefits.
Any other questions? Tori, thank you so much. We appreciate you. I think we would be ready for a motion then.
I move to approve the increase in MPO staff full-time equivalents from 2.8 to 3.0 by way of resolution 2024-07.
Second.
Excellent. We have a motion from Mr. Mendez and a second from Mr. Chang. Any further discussion? Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you. Now I'll have to learn your last name.
Ahmed.
I'm sorry?
Ahmed.
Ahmed, thank you. Mr. Ahmed seconded that one for us. And all those in favor?
Aye.
And that is unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Thanks again, Tori. That moves us right along to agenda item number 7. And this is an item regarding fiscal year 26 budget reserve and sponsorship funding. Tyler?
Yes, I will jump in and do sponsorships first, because I'm hoping that's a little more simple. So earlier this year, the board discussed potentially having funding available for sponsoring events that could be speakers or helping offset costs for conferences. And with that, so I think what we're seeking guidance on today is, does the board want to include a sponsorships line item in the FY26 budget? If so, how much? I think the board had talked earlier this year about setting some guidelines on sponsorship funding and pushing those towards projects for speakers or events where it's talking about climate change, transportation options, transportation safety, matching funds for conferences or things that are scheduled and they're needing matching funds, or if there's kind of a last gap bit of funding that might be needed to be able to pull off an event. And then I'm wondering, the other question we had was, do we want to have an official simplified policy on sponsorships or providing sponsorship funding to external entities? So a bunch of questions in there. I'm just wondering if we could, kind of walk through those and get some guidance.
Anybody? Ideas?
So the existing sponsorship funding, I thought we had, it's not communications, but I'm looking for the line item that it currently comes from. And you're proposing that we would take that money and create a new category called sponsorships. Is that right?
Yeah, and we've not had an official sponsorships. We've not really built it into our budget. We've been approached a few times to help provide funding for events. When there was the Dutch Cycling Embassy, we ended up utilizing some of our COVID funding for that event. And then I think it was Charles Marone, when he was here 2 or 3 years ago, we provided some support for that, and we pulled that out of our, I'm trying to remember, I don't remember what line item it was, but we pulled that out of an existing materials and services line item where we thought we had a little bit of extra funding. And so it was in communications, public outreach type line item. And so I think we can still do that kind of a one-off approach, or, move it more formally into having its own stand line item in the budget.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense of what the trade-off is. And I can't really think of any, except that maybe having sponsorship in there would certainly invite more applications for it, because then it's a little bit more clear what the intention is there for it. But with that intention, I think we could probably develop some guidelines that might help with that too.
Does having that line item limit what we can spend those funds on then? Because it seems like we're already pretty flexible, but.
No, I mean, I think it could be spent. I'll put Tori on the spot here, but I mean, it would be in our materials and services component of our budget. And if we didn't spend, say if we put $1,000 in there, we didn't spend those 1,000 in a fiscal year, it could be reallocated to something else within materials and services and not require a formal budget adjustment. Am I correct in that, Tori?
Yep, that's exactly right. We can move budget between materials and services objects without a formal budget adjustment. So it's not like a use it or lose it. If you didn't end up awarding all the sponsorships, then you could, like Tyler said, reallocate that for another purpose.
I think that in the past, it's just been one-off requests and discussion. And that means there's kind of no context as far as the amount goes, right?
Right.
And so if it was decided in advance, we're gonna have this sponsorship category, it's gonna contain X number of dollars. And for example, the Dutch cycling, we were quite generous. 10,000, did we contribute?
About,
About $10,000, which was far, far, far and away, a lot of money in the context of our whole budget. And then in the context of any other sponsorships, to my mind. So, to me, the advantage would be if you had, say, the whole, $10,000 in this category and someone came with a request, you just have that context of, are they asking for all, is this all the money we have for this one thing? Is this a big request? Is it? And, that's the only thing I can see that might make the decision a little easier when the request comes, to just be able to kind of gauge, is this typical of the MPO? Is this what we're trying to do with our funds? And so that's the only, reason I think it would be advantageous to have that. And if I understand Tori correctly, even having this, you could always decide to move more money from materials and services into this line item if you got a request that was just amazing. And then I would ask a question, Tyler. The other thing it seems like we have done for more money was pilot programs that we participated in. Did the MPO contribute when OSU was piloting transit on the west side? Remember those 2 years?
yeah, I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Right? That's the other place where I remember someone coming in saying, we've got this project, we want to run this pilot, can you help us pay?
But I think that, if I remember correctly, I believe that we utilized some of our, what at that time were federal STBG funds.
There you
I
go.
think we utilized part of those for that project.
Okay, so that would still be just entirely different than a sponsorship
Yeah.
kind of a thing. That's just the only other time I can remember anybody really, coming in here and saying. So those are my comments.
Well, I mean, if we are supportive of it, we have to pick a number to fund it. It sounds like the range is sort of 1,000 to 10,000.
Just have a possible creation. So we're just looking for guidance for staff right now, correct?
Yeah.
And yeah, I would say those are the questions. How much money is going in? And what do you do if there's money left over? Does that money continue to linger in that fund so you have more available for sponsorship the next year? Or does it go back to, what was it, materials and service? Does it go? So it's, as far as I can tell, those are the questions.
Historically, we haven't had a sponsorship request every year.
No.
I mean,
But I think we have a small one. We're gonna have somebody come to us next month with a small request. And I think if we do create this as a line item and put together a policy, then we as staff, I think we probably want to push that policy out to some of the different nonprofits and others in the area that could be interested in it, just letting those dollars are available.
I thought of another,
I mean, if you actually formally establish a program, the demand might increase.
Yes, I would expect so.
The other thing I just thought of as far as just a little bit of clarity, it seems like last year we did have a request, or it might not have been last year.
Yes.
But either way, we had a request and the program was more city planning than transportation planning.
Yeah, it was one of the Building a Better Bend lectures. We had a request for funding. And I think the board opted not to sponsor that event because it was, more generic urban growth type discussion versus more transportation specific.
And so something like that could be included in this policy,
Yeah.
just so that you're not having to make that decision over and over and over again. Do we want to support just general city planning, general urban growth, or do we want to be more specific to transportation? Is just another thing, if you had this policy, might save you time down the road.
I think that's the interesting question, actually, because if you look at the City of Bend sponsorships policy, it's fairly broad, which is maybe unsurprising. And I feel like for this body, it would be more useful to be more narrowly focused. I would be supportive of creating it and funding it with some sort of middle of the road amount, with the expectation maybe even slightly less, so that there is the option if we felt like we needed to move funding, but that there's not the expectation that we spend it all every year. And then, when you have some of the guidelines on there, I'm of course not opposed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. However, from this body's perspective, that might even be too broad, because reduced greenhouse gas emissions could be related to any number of things that are only tangentially related to transportation planning. So I like the idea of having something, targeting maybe transportation sector, greenhouse gases, or safety. I think those fall in line. I like the idea of focusing it a little bit more than the City of Bend's. It's called the Policy on Discretionary Funding / Sponsorship of Community Programs, Services, and Events. And it's fairly broad. So I like the idea of being a little bit narrower. Does that sound palatable, or?
I think being specific to transportation makes sense. I don't know about, not knowing that the City of Bend's policy. I can't say, oh, it needs to be much narrower than that or wider than that or anything like that. But I think being, the example you just gave, greenhouse gases, we're talking about transportation sector greenhouse gases, not just any greenhouse gases. I would also, I would like there to be some kind of equity or vulnerable and marginal populations transportation related criteria, opportunity here as well.
It's a good addition.
I think that sounds attractive, yeah.
And we'll talk about budget reserves in just a moment, but I think we're entering a period of a fair amount of uncertainty, I think, over the next couple of years. And so I think keeping sponsorships, I personally, as a staff person, support adding it as a line item, but I would recommend keeping it the dollar amount lower rather than higher until we have a better sense of where things, stand over the next couple of years.
Makes total sense.
So,
2,500.
yeah, that's fine. Something like that, I think is appropriate.
Okay.
Get beyond that.
All right.
Not knowing what size the small one that you said is coming next month.
It's $200, I think,
Okay.
is what they want. And something $200 to $300. So pretty clear.
We're good with 2,500.
Yes.
27, no.
Great, thank you. All right, that will move us along to agenda item number 8, which,
More on budget.
more budget. What did I do?
There's
Skip
2
to the
parts
wrong-
to it. Yeah, there's.
Got it. Sorry, go ahead.
So, and I'm gonna have to call on Tori to help me with this one a little bit, but, so we want to get some guidance as well on reserves. And this is something that, there's 3 options for budgeting reserves. Unallocated program budget. And with that, that's the way kind of a de facto way that we've done reserves in the past. And what that means is, like in materials and services, we have a consultant line item. And as we've built our budget, when we have unused or unallocated funding, we've typically just moved it into that consultant line item as just kind of a holding place for those funds, and then we could move them around as needed. We also have contingency, which is a contingency budget line item, which we've had in our budget for quite some time. And then there's the option to actually have a real reserve line item that we would be created and then be building funding into that for some purpose down the road for longer term planning. And so I've mentioned up here, we've used that option one, the unallocated program budget, and then carried those funds typically forward each fiscal year if we've had unspent funds. And so I think I put on there recommend maintaining the $100,000 contingency. I think we under budget. I mean, I think that's kind of standard budget, procedure that we do that. We are more, what I really want to talk about is developing potentially a formal reserve fund and thinking about a couple of items, long-term planning needs. So our next big plan update for the MPO will be due in 2029. We're hoping to pull some more of that work in-house and have, the three of us doing a little bit more of the work. We still will rely upon consultants to help us with some aspects of that work. We're doing a lot of work related to our transportation model, and a lot of that work is really being driven now by the climate rules and trying to get our travel model to be much better able to understand, how small improvements in, particularly bike facilities, would modify travel behavior. There's travel survey data that we know we will need to be collecting in the future to help some of our analysis. And then I think there's the opportunity as well for the MPO to potentially fund special planning projects that the board is interested in pursuing. And so there's those long-term planning needs and then long-term risk. And so for us, under that item, our funding is primarily federal funding for the MPO for MPO staffing. The bulk of that comes from the Federal Highway Administration, and it says PL funding. That's the federal highway funding that comes into our budget. Both those dollars and some FTA, Federal Transit Administration funding we get, they both require a local match. And up until this next fiscal year, ODOT has always provided 100% of the matching funds for the PL funds. Given ODOT's funding situation, they're cutting that match by 50% next year. And depending on what happens in this upcoming legislative session, if there isn't significant funding or, a funding package approved, those funds could be outright, then matching funds could be outright eliminated in the FY27 budget. The other big issue is that the current federal transportation bill, IIJA, expires in September of 2026. There's two parts to that I put up here. The way that bill is written, Congress has been significantly overspending transportation funding for quite some time. And so about 30 to 40% of IIJA funding is coming from other places. It's not coming from the Highway Trust Fund. And I think moving forward, we're hearing at least that those 30 to 40% funds, that's going to be an easy target, for this next Congress, this next administration to go after. And then the Highway Trust Fund, because those revenues have been, in the bigger scheme of things, they're relatively stagnant and expected to start declining pretty rapidly in coming years as, there's more EVs on the road and as, the mileage rates increase for new vehicles. And as noted there, the last federal gas tax increase was implemented, over 20 or 30 years ago now at this point. So
I wrote it down so I wouldn't be cheating. H.W. Bush.
no, I believe it was Clinton.
Was Clinton in 93?
Yes, I believe.
Oh, right, because he had 8 as 92, yeah.
And I think the other issue is that ODOT's planning funding, I think, has been, for planning purposes, has been either stagnant or declining. I know that you're being forced to do more work in-house now. So I think our partners, everybody's facing funding issues. And so I think kind of into that long-term planning needs. Not only do we have our own planning needs, the MPO that we have to meet, but I think, we may be getting called upon by our partners to help potentially, provide gap funding for some of the planning projects that, they want to be pursuing over the next few years. And so, our staff recommendation is that we work to better cost out, or you do some cost estimating for our long-term planning needs over the next, 3 to 5 years. Contact our partners about some of their planning needs. Develop options for building that reserve. And so by options, I mean, how much per year we, want to be doing, and how much, so we start building that reserve with something that, there's enough funding there to actually do something with it. And what does that look like? And what can we actually do with our existing budget? And then present those options to the policy board in January or February, and then start building that into our FY26 budget. Does that all make sense? And do you have, questions or comments on what I presented?
So, yeah, a couple questions. The 100,000 recommendation, what would it be intended to fund in this proposal? If it's, is it mostly long-term planning, basically savings for long-term planning costs? Or is it to try to replace the potential loss of revenue for what kind of purpose? Is it for staff planning needs, or are there other specific things in mind? And then the last question is, when I think about reserves, it's also to, it's sort of plan for the future, replace potential loss of revenue. And then the other one is, of course, unanticipated expenses. But do you have thoughts on, I mean, it does sound like you're not anticipating any unanticipated expenses. So you didn't mention that.
No, I think I'm going to ask Tori a question. So contingency, this is where I get a little confused. I'm a little confused on the budget stuff. So we have contingency, we would have contingency and potentially a reserve line item. And can you explain the difference between those two?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, they are very similar in that they're both meant to be a safety net. It's kind of just a difference in timing. The contingency is budgeted annually. We've been at 100K budgeted contingency for as long as I've been participating in the MPO budget. And that is more meant to mitigate short-term risk within the budget year. So that's for unexpected expenses that may arise, or cost increases that weren't anticipated in the given budget year. The reserve is meant to be more of a long-term solution where, whether, like Tyler said, whether that's planning for reduced funding in the future that we may need to offset, or if there's a project in mind that we know is going to be more cost prohibitive than our annual funding can allow, the reserve would allow us to build up kind of a bucket of money to use for that future project. So the reserve is meant to be more of a long-term planning solution, whereas the contingency is meant to mitigate annual risk. And then the third option that Tyler discussed, that unallocated program funding, is kind of just to add a buffer in the budget if you anticipate projects will come up in the given fiscal year, that you want to have the flexibility to support without needing to draw from either contingency or reserves. So it's kind of like planning for TBD projects within the current year, versus the reserve is then kind of that long-term project planning view. And the contingency is really just meant to mitigate the short-term risk. So for something like our FTE change this year, if we weren't able to support that with the current budget, then we would draw from contingency. So it's kind of more meant for little things like that that may arise, whereas the reserve is really that long-term planning scope.
So do you see those longer term risks to funding as, Tyler, affecting reserve or contingency? Because it sounds like they'll have program effects on an annual basis, but we won't necessarily experience them until
Right.
that year.
Yeah.
So it seems like it wouldn't, like, I wouldn't say that the reserve idea is a good way to plan for those potential losses of revenue then. Because it sounds like the reserve idea is more for a longer term planning goal that we can then sort of contribute to over time. But it sounds like we're talking about three things then: the contingency reserve and then the unallocated program funding. Right?
Yeah. And so I think it's whether, do we, with question, I'll ask Tori another question. I think with contingency, if we have, with the uncertainty, say if we experience a decline in our funding from ODOT next year or the year after, would our contingency always be able to cover that? Or would we eventually need to be, dipping into reserves to cover, a funding change? It's coming down from either the state or at the federal level.
That really depends on the impact of any potential funding decrease. The other kind of major difference between the contingency and reserves is that the contingency is always going to be budgeted at that 100K level annually. So it's kind of, if we dip into it one year, it's always replenished in the next year's budget. The reserve is meant to be more of a bucket that you build up gradually, so that if there is a more significant impact in the future, you have the ability to offset that. So contingency is kind of expected to be used during the budget year it's expected to be used for unexpected costs. Reserves are more intended for something more significant, whether that's a project that you're planning for in the future or future funding levels decreasing. So, I mean, you'd have the ability to utilize either category at any point. You do need a budget adjustment to draw down both contingency or reserves. But the reserves is really just, we would use contingency first, I guess, is the best way to say it. Like, contingency is kind of our first line of defense. Reserve is then like our backup safety net, where if there are long-term impacts that we can't sustain with contingency, then we would need to dip into the reserve to offset those impacts.
If I could also just say, I mean, I like having long-term planning needs under reserves, but I would almost see it more like we build reserves for disaster. And then if we reach a point where the reserves are ample and we haven't had a disaster, then we can do cool things with because disaster happens. And yeah, I mean, you just think about the last couple of years, the way that inflation has wreaked havoc on public agency budgets for just personnel costs.
Yeah.
I mean, that maybe the MPO has escaped that to some degree because you only have a few staff, right? But if you had 100 staff, like,
It's an impact on us even.
Yeah,
at a
okay.
Small level.
Right. So yeah, I just wanted to say that that's the way I would think about it, build a reserve for disasters first. And then if you reach a point where, your reserve is very healthy and you happen to have to use it for other things, then, you can think about, neat additional projects that you can implement.
I would be supportive of consulting partners on long-term planning needs, because I think some long-term planning needs may not be nice to have. Like, I think it could play both roles, but some of them might just by their nature be farther out or longer term, and I'd like to learn more about them. But I think it sounds like reserves could be used for both, and we would have to have discretion at least. So just to clarify, are you still, earlier you had suggested 100,000 for contingency, but then the idea of a reserve might depend on partner needs and what those long-term planning needs
Yeah.
are. And the
And I think-
potential to anticipate unanticipated disaster or other expenses.
Yeah, and I could see, I guess, just kind of thinking out loud here, but I could see us building building the reserve up, and then we hit it. It gets tapped into for a long-range plan update or something else. It goes down a little bit, kind of doing that thing, over time, is that we tap into it as needed, either for our own work at the MPO or, trying to remember back to when the Parkway plan was developed, the MPO contributed, I think, when I was running in the head, financial issues at that point even, and I think the MPO contributed 30,000 towards that planning study, into one of those phases of that effort. So I can see those kind of requests happening in the future, from our member entities, depending on how their funding situations look.
And from that perspective, the reserve has a strategic role as well. I mean, contingency is just, we know things are gonna come up that we just don't know exactly. We can't identify right at the moment, but we just know they're gonna come up. But Tyler, what you were talking about was, kind of it's like strategically saving for something.
Yes.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Do we have a sense of what the 50% match requirement is gonna cost?
It's not a huge amount. I mean, I think it's,
Now we receive around 21,000. That's sound right?
might be. That's a lot. I I think in this next year's budget, it's gonna be less than $20,000, in terms of that impact to us. But when you have a relatively small budget, 20,000 is a lot, And I think if it was outright eliminated, then it becomes a bigger issue. It starts pushing 30,000, 40,000, something like that.
So the 21 is like the full match amount you've been receiving, let's just say, not the half.
Right.
I'm just trying to understand scale and like to the
Yeah.
discussion.
And our match will be going in one good thing for us, the way the federal funding is distributed among the state's MPOs, there's a formula that's funds. And that formula is typically only updated every 10 years. And we just went through an update process on that formula. And we're going to benefit fairly well, I think, from some of the current revisions to it. And so we should be, at least in the next year or two, assuming nothing happens at the federal level, our budget should be at least stable and hopefully increasing a little bit, giving us the ability to start moving some funding into a reserve. That's what we want to do.
I'm looking at the clock, which is saying we're behind. Which is entirely.
So I think, I guess I would say, it sounds like there's, support to move forward with this concept and to come back with, some harder numbers, list of projects and some harder numbers that we could then use to help identify what that reserve, how much we want to create it, and then how much per year we can start pushing towards building. Is that reflective of?
It's for me. Yeah.
And you don't need a motion until
No.
you come back to us with a more formal policy.
Yeah.
Okay.
That sound all right?
Yeah.
Any more comments for Tyler before you? All right, great. Thanks, everybody. That then moves us along to number 8. Where are we at? MTIP amendments. Kelly.
Yeah. So we just have 4 amendments to the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, the MTIP, to present to you today. So there's 3 transit projects and 1 county project, and 2 of the transit projects are just adding, it's their annual capital funding that we're looking at here. So 2 are to add them to the MTIP, and 1 is just to increase the funds to match the grant amount. And then the county project is their SS4A grant funding for the TSAP update. And so I think these are pretty straightforward, but the information is here on the board as far as the amounts go. We did the normal public comment period that opened on November 21st, and it has since closed. No comments were received. So we just ask for consideration of approval of those amendments.
Any questions? Would you flip back
It's a lot of text.
to the other slide?
Tyler, do you mind going back?
Oh, thanks, Tyler. Okay, so the amount is how much the MPO needs to spend because of those projects?
No, it's
No.
just the project amount.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
And it just needs to be listed in this transportation improvement in the MTIP.
yeah, because
Got
it affects our MPO area.
It's not affecting the money is not us.
Right.
It's just what needs to be into the plan, and the plan is us.
Yes.
Thank you.
I move to approve the proposed amendments to the 2024-2027 MTIP as presented.
Second.
Great. We have a motion and a second from Counselor Mendez and Omar. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Great, that's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for explaining that to us. That moves us right along to number 9, Deschutes County Transportation System Plan and the Tumalo Community Plan. Tarek.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair Campbell. And a little bit of this will be sort of a well-worn information, especially for Commissioner Chang, other folks that are closely involved. But we have Chris Doty here as well from the County Road Department in case anything does come up here. I think I'm trying to share my screen here, but let's see here. There we go. I just have a quick presentation and then we'll be on our way. I know we're a little bit behind time, so I'll try to be brief here. But just as the agenda and as Chair Campbell said, we'll start here we'll do an overview of both the transportation system plan update and the Tumalo community plan update that happened earlier this year within the county system. We'll start first with the TSP, or the transportation system plan. It's for the years of 2020 to 2040. So this is pretty baseline information, but the plan itself is an element of our comprehensive plan at the county. And we prioritize projects in terms of funding and implementation, much like the list you just saw in the last item for the MTIP updates. But we plan out for a 20-year period going from 2020 to 2040. We prioritize those projects where we can, and then we include some long-term visioning statements and sort of goals and policies related to those projects there. We need to update this about every 10 years just to accommodate for growth, different types of social stats, other types of changes that have happened over those 10-year periods. So this is happening at the midpoint of the previous 2010 to 2030 plan. There's kind of a decrease in revenue. This is a continuing pattern for new investments, and really provides prioritization on how those investments can be carried forward in the future. But that continuing decrease is pretty proportionate to the county's emphasis on maintaining existing facilities, things like that. A lot of that work is directed that way. It emphasizes the county's transportation system's role in the event of the Cascadia subduction event, and this region being sort of a standalone island there, and then incorporates the other agencies' comprehensive plans and concepts from ODOT, Cascadia's Transit, and other agencies. And then one central feature of our TSP update is we continued to keep the roadway moratorium, so no longer accepting new roads into our county system for maintenance. And so these are, the cities that have their own TSPs. We do the county regions outside of those 4. We had a lot of staff helping, a consultant team, Kittleson. We had about 160 people at the initial open houses that were undertaken by the consultant. A lot of agency coordination meetings, ODOT, CET, other folks, and then many of the pedestrian and bicycle projects were informed by input from the county's Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, or BPAC. For the two kind of meetings I was mentioning earlier with the 160 or so folks commenting, these were the four areas that were really most emphasized. There was the Sunrise Boulevard functional reclassification project. There was support for that. It was to bump it up from a local road to a collector. Deschutes River Woods South Interchange project is kind of an ongoing larger project. It's ODOT driven. It's a grade separated interchange that's on 97 that connects Deschutes River Woods with kind of the High Desert Museum area.
I'm sorry, is that Baker Road?
That's basically Baker Road. Yeah, that whole interchange area where the IAMP is called on the ODOT side. It's called the Baker Road IAMP, I believe, or the Baker IAMP. Yeah. And then there was Sisters of Black Butte Ranch bike path or the multi-use pathway. And then we have Chris Doty here. That was, I don't know if that, yeah, he was around for those original meetings there.
And he's got his hand up.
Yeah.
The Deschutes River Woods South Interchange project is a new interchange on the south end of Deschutes River Woods. That would also pick up the High Desert Museum on the other side of the highway. So it's a separate standalone project.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Apologies about that one.
It's okay.
Yeah,
Thanks,
no.
Chris. So that's very interesting because, yeah, there's also Baker Road.
Yeah, a lot of activity down there. Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
And then as kind of a separate project, there was the pedestrian bike bridge that was down in sort of the southern UGB area that would cross the river there. That was kind of pushed from a neighborhood and a lot of different emphasis from it's within a Bend Park and Rec District master plan. And so there was some interface with their long-term planning documents. So the overview, just in terms of the document structure, the plan structure itself, is there's an intro, goals and policies, there's needs assessments, the way that we provide for multimodal systems, so pedestrian, bike, and transit, investment priorities, and then funding. Overall, we had about $190 million total in the anticipated cost estimates. We had this ultimately, those projects help inform the capital improvement plan for the county. And then we've mentioned at the previous item there that the county includes their recommendations from the current TSAP, Transportation Safety Action Plan, but that, as we just saw, is moving into an update process here. So we'll be, it's a growing document. It lives and gets updated as we update the other referenced plans and documents. Leaves a lot of flexibility for the future in terms of those investments and incorporates kind of flexibility in terms of how those things might change in terms of need and funding. This is a really brief overview of what those investments look like. There's intersections, roadway projects, functional classification changes, ODOT projects, bike and pedestrian facilities, bridges. There's FLAP projects, which is the Federal Lands Access Program projects, transit, and then safety projects. Again, kind of the funding priority here, what I'd mentioned earlier is the main emphasis is the current maintenance and operational standards are to remain in place. That's a lot of the work that goes on. The road moratorium kind of speaks to that as well. It's, there's no capacity to bring in new roads for maintenance. Just with a lot of the previous plans basically saying the same thing. The road moratorium is still necessary. And then really the funding levels remain relatively consistent with the past, and there's no major programs that are implemented to significantly change those revenues. So the county uses the TSP to work with our agency partners for funding and project priorities. We continue to work with those agencies on prioritizing additional projects, changing priority of the existing list if those do change. The capital improvement plan list also changes and gets updated as we move forward and gets informed really by this initial priority list. It informs some of what, is a larger scale, long-term planning for our land use policies and land use process. And then it helps with public outreach and identifying ways in which we can reach out to the public about these ideas. So the process summary, we had about 370 public comments, a lot of different individual public commenters and agencies. The emphasis of those comments was on multi-use pathways in general, including the Sisters of Black Butte Ranch multi-use pathway connection. And then that Brookswood, Deschutes River Wood footbridge we were talking about in the southern UGB area. Then there was emphasis and quite a few comments from the Three Rivers area, South County. That was kind of they're within a special road district, but they were sort of looking for long-range planning concentration around that neighborhood, around that area. And then comments around bicycle route community connections. And there was a planning commission hearing in the fall of 2023. And then followed by a Board of County Commissioners hearing that November of 2023. And then that all made its way into deliberation and recommendation process in February of this year. Really, the final product was pretty similar to the initial draft, but some of the priority statuses were changed, and there was a lack of, or we removed the priority status from the bike route community connections portion of the recommendations. And then that became effective on June of this year after 90 days. So that was done earlier in the summer. And I think just for time purposes, I might go just briefly here through the Tumalo community plan. If you have questions, we'll kind of go through them at the end there. But similar, it's to the TSP, the Tumalo community plan itself is an appendix to the county's comprehensive plan. Looks at a 20-year planning horizon, deals in this case with a specific geographic area being the unincorporated community boundary of Tumalo, gives visioning statements for that defined area and goals and policies related to different aspects of that area in terms of long-range planning, and really provides just guidance for that land use, but doesn't actually change any of the rules, the zoning rules itself for development or uses. So kind of similar structure. It's got a vision statement, history, zoning, population information, info on the public facilities, and then some assessment of the surrounding uses. The goals and policies themselves that are informed by sort of all that information and this collective public outreach are related to land use, natural resources, open space and recreation, residential policies, economic policies, public facilities, and transportation. So Tumalo is considered an unincorporated community per Oregon Administrative Rule 660, Division 22. And it's specifically considered a rural unincorporated community, which is basically where they're under that definition of OAR. It's a type of residential zone where there's permanent or area where there's permanent residential dwellings, but there's also at least two of these other uses that are either industrial or commercial or provide sort of public uses.
Are you rural if you are within 2 miles of a Costco?
Yeah, and rural, that they do really spell it out in a pretty detailed way in terms of those definitions, but exactly, there's some kind of more urban aspects than a total resource.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one that's, in flux.
Yeah, so that unincorporated
It's more than 2 miles.
Is it?
I was gonna, but it's an unincorporated community per OAR is really this in-between category, in between like a highly urbanized area and a rural county area. And so we, just like earlier, I kind of said there's no zoning changes here, but under our own Deschutes County Code, Title 1867, that's the actual zoning rules that dictate what uses are and aren't allowed and what types of requirements are needed for any proposals or development. Here's a map just kind of broadly showing the outline of Tumalo. It's sometimes a surprise where it stretches to the northeast and down to the southwest. And then on the far right, it's just a build out with the gray being built out lots and the orange being vacant. So it's pretty well built out, but there's definitely some vacant land there. So, all these plans talk to each other and they incorporate by reference a lot of the other different long range documents. So the TSP we just talked about, the county's comprehensive plan, and then the previous Tumalo community plan variations that was informed sort of show us the growth and show us just where all these other policies and goals talk to each other. So a lot of there was a lot going on in Tumalo to just in a kind of a simple way to put it. One of the main things was the sewer feasibility study was funded by the county, and that's recently undergone district formation that's overseen by a Laidlaw Irrigation District. The kind of aging wastewater systems in that community are looking kind of like they're near the end of their lives. And so the sewer feasibility study was a hot topic at the time. Yes, Chris, I saw you raised your hand.
Yeah, just point of order. Yeah, they're two separate districts. Laidlaw isn't part of the sewer district. Sure. It's they're originally kind of kickstarted by a Laidlaw board member, but they're really unaffiliated.
That's a really good point of it looks like when they were voting for the directorship under even just the November ballot, there was some overlap in terms of the staff of those two districts, but they're disparate districts for sure.
And is it actually called the Laidlaw Irrigation District?
Yeah, there's there is a Laidlaw irrigation, or there's a Laidlaw, there's
It's a water district.
it's a water district, yeah, correct. And then there's also the Tumalo Community Ditch, I believe, is like that's a separate entity, but then there's obviously the Tumalo Irrigation District there, but yeah, those are two of the older ones, but then there was
The community ditch, then they're automatically rural.
Sure.
So I take back my rural urban comment from before.
and I haven't spoken with that representatives from them, but then, yeah, there were ODOT projects, obviously the roundabouts on Highway 20 and Obi Riley Cook were big points of just comment and focus at that time. Then there was the county approved multi-use pathway that goes underneath Highway 20 to the north end of Tumalo for bikes and peds. So the need for an update was, again, because we're kind of at the halfway mark of the previous plans, planning horizon, a lot of population growth in the area. We saw a lot of commercial development at the time, the food cart pods and cideries and such. There was a small private sewer system on the west side of the highway in this kind of new neighborhood off of Strickler. That was a very new feature at the time. Again, those ODOT projects and roundabouts, and then there was just overall considerations of traffic increase and different traffic patterns. So we did a lot of public outreach that was kind of tailored to the size and the nature of the community. We put out flyers for the first open house. We had a project specific website with a story map. We conducted 3 different open houses in the school, public school there. Developed an email contact list that we were able to use on and we'll be able to continue using for other outreach efforts in Tumalo. We had these one-on-one meetings called Meet a Planner sessions where you could schedule time, just 1 or 2 folks with a staff planner. We interviewed stakeholders, business owners, different folks like that were pretty central to the community there. And then we, of course, had our planning commission and board of county commissioners public hearings.
Chris, your hand is still up. Did you want to say something?
No, sorry.
Okay, it's okay. Go ahead, Tori.
And then, yeah, similar, just outlining the process here is there were about 30 public comments from both individual commenters and agency partners. A lot of it was around what we just previously went over, the sewer and wastewater situation in Tumalo, concerns about annexation into any kind of other district, a state park or the city of Bend itself or anything like that. Concerns generally around public safety and then around river resources and pollution impact, things like that. So again, we had a public or planning commission public hearing in the fall of 2023, followed by a board of county commissioners public hearing in December the following month. And then the deliberations and recommendation from the board earlier this year in March really only included a few amendments to the goals and policies, but one of the more specific ones sort of speaking to the concerns around sewer was there was a policy to pursue legislative amendments to the Tumalo zoning code that would limit multifamily housing to 4 units maximum. There was concern that the sewer coming into that community would open up this door for really high density development, lots of multi-unit housing, apartment complex types things. And so this was sort of an effort, reflecting the collective public input of trying to limit this type of development to something that looked and felt like this smaller towns or rural community feel. There was just general support for the mitigation of river impacts and recreation. There was also general support for community engagement processes and public art. And then that became effective in August of earlier this year after 90 days.
And the state will allow an unincorporated community to forbid multi-unit more than 4.
So it's just a statement in the goals and policies that says it's a recommendation to pursue legislative text amendment changes to the zoning code. So it doesn't immediately result in that zoning code being changed. Someone would have to apply for that as a text amendment within the county zone application process and then spell out how they, would want the zoning code to say, in the menu where it says, oh, the permitted uses here, you can have multifamily housing. Then in theory, someone applying for that text amendment would say, okay, I want it to say, but limited to 4 units or something to that effect. But then even that proposal would have to be reviewed by the Board of County Commissioners and undergo a big public process itself. So this is really kind of an aspirational policy or goal within that document that's more or less reflective of a lot of the public input.
Comments and things.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And Tarek, it's 4 units per lot.
Yeah, exactly. Not, yeah, that's a really good clarification.
4 units per lot.
Got it.
It's,
Yeah.
you know, so a quadplex on, and the lots, you
Mhm.
know, when laid law was originally laid out, the lots were pretty small.
Mm.
So 4 units per lot is density. I mean,
I
it's still
understand.
density.
Sure. No, I
It's
understand.
not Jack Straw, but right.
Right.
Isn't a lot of Tumalo that 5-acre standard residential zone?
There's, I mean, there's a relative amount. The core area is really these very small historic laid law. Really, they're some of them are like 16 feet wide or something. They're really small lots, but there is a TUR 5-acre minimum, they call it, zoning district that's on, a lot of it's on like the east side of the river and those larger lots there. Some of it's in the southwest near Bend Research. But that's one of the residential zones. There's a couple, there's a standard residential zone as well. That's more within the Tumalo core area though. And that's where a lot of this focus of the sewer concern was in that sort of, I would say, the community core, just based on public input.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and I know we're short for time, but if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to. I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen here really quick.
Okay.
And I have to run in a minute, but I just also wanted to say, the MPO was tracking or has tracked pretty closely, I think, the multi-use paved pathway coming out of DRW heading south.
Yeah.
You know, towards, and that was a major, you know, most of the heat was around the Black Butte Ranch to Sisters paved pathway, but that second one got plenty of heat as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So so it was a nail biter. What, you know, in my opinion, it was a nail biter whether we were actually going to even have those multi-use pathways in the TSP or not. But got it done. Yeah.
Good. That's great.
Before I hit out, I just wanted to thank Barb for chairing our MPO and it's been a great pleasure and honor to serve with you here. And thank you for your broader service on council.
Thanks, Phil. Appreciate it. All right, that moves us to item number 10, City of Bend mobility points.
Sorry,
Yeah, it's okay.
if I could, I just wanted to ask, I didn't see it in the county's TSP, but you had spoken to the broader traffic patterns, and I had heard, I think it was an ODOT figure several years ago that of commute trips in Bend, about half of them originated outside of Bend's urban growth boundary. And as we have basically pushed people out due to affordability concerns, I'm curious about whether that pattern has changed. And if you have any ideas about the kind of the commute dynamics that might impact either transit planning, you know, is it mostly from places like Deschutes River Woods that are right next to Bend, or is it a lot of Redmond and Pineville and LaPine that are their own UGB? Well, maybe not Pineville, but no, Pineville has a UGB, right?
Right, yes.
So any idea about the kind of that commute dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, very broadly, I think it is probably more UGB centric, just having that transit focus. Like most of those routes are within the city boundaries themselves. They're usually these kind of, even a lot of it mirrors some of the climate work that the state's dictating, just these sort of like epicenter areas, things that are hub areas for employment and otherwise. I think what we looked at briefly and what ODOT, and it's a lot of it's driven by either CET or ODOT sort of emphasis though, is that, yeah, there's that Deschutes River Woods Baker Road interchange has, I know, a tentative plan in their draft concept for one of the transit stops. And then there was some discussion around Tumalo itself of having a transit center, that not a center, but really just a bus stop there. But there was, again, just a lot of public input around it, a lot of controversy. But I would say that generally any of that analysis for commute sheds, things like that, that tends to be more of a UGB centric, city centric study.
But I would add too, I think the Census Bureau has one of the data tools they have, it's called On the Map, and they produce that commute data. And it's updated every 2 or 3 years, I think, and I can share that with you.
Yeah, that would be
I've been, each time it gets updated, I just have a spreadsheet that's been tracking it over time, showing those commute flows into and out of Bend and how they've been changing. And I think the data goes back to sometime pre-2010. It may even go back as far as 2005. So we have that. It's not, of course, 100% accurate, but you can look at
Yeah,
some of the dynamics and how they've changed over time. It's really interesting data.
that would be great.
I'll get that to you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll try and get that to you in the next week or two.
Thank you. Thank you, Barb.
All right, that gets us to number 10, City of Bend, mobility points, existing system, carbon reduction. Have we got Toby? There he is, Toby.
Hi, how's everybody doing?
Hi.
Thanks for
Long
having
time
me.
no see.
Toby, do you want to share your screen or should I pull it up?
I can share it.
Okay, perfect.
I'll do that right now. Let me know when you guys can see it, and then I will just go here on starting that slideshow from the beginning. And can you see
looks
that?
great. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I think it's running a little bit late, and I want to give you enough time for your next point after this. I think that deserves much more time than what we have been doing. So this presentation, let me get this out of the way. Some of you have seen this already at other meetings. As the focus of this presentation is to give you a little bit of an update on shared micromobility in Bend, where we have been, what we're going to do in the future, where we were with the neighborhood mobility points and what we're going to do in the future, and then a little bit very high level update on the carbon reduction program. As you remember, and now the city received the carbon reduction grant around $1.2 million total. We are in the process right now with ODOT to finalize what we're going to do with that. So let's dive in. So shared micromobility. All of you know this better than anybody else, because thanks to the MPO and a small grant that we received a couple of years ago, we were able to actually relaunch shared micromobility, specifically bike share in Bend, after that program kind of like ended with the beginning of the pandemic. We launched that program as a 2-year pilot program in 2022, which we also extended towards the end of 2024 after 2 successful seasons. For that last year, meaning this 2024 season, we set some very high goals, which we did not reach, and we are okay with that, because I think it wasn't so much for us about reaching a certain ridership. We really wanted to look, can we address the #1 complaints, which were bikes left in like randomly and bikes blocking ADA ramps and all those kind of things. So, and I come to that in a second. Now, we wanted to show how the ridership data compared for the 3 seasons of the program. And as you can see, ridership was very high in 2022. Actually, in 2022, we were the most successful program for our partner Bird in the country, maybe even beyond that. In 23, we dipped down a little bit. In 2024, we dipped down a little bit more. As you can also see, the average rides deployed were going up and down a little bit. And then everything was kind of like on track, which is funny, right? So in total miles traveled in 2022 were just under 25,000. In 2023, with way less rides, they were still on the same level. So that's interesting. And in 2024, compared to how low rides we had, the miles traveled were actually pretty good. Now, do we think there was a positive impact on car trips removed and greenhouse gas emissions reductions? We think so, but it's, I think, important to note that there isn't really a good way to really clearly 100% safely say that every bike trip could have been a car trip. It could have also been a pedestrian trip or something else. We don't know. Maybe we know that better in the future. What I would like to point out is that why do we think these numbers were lower in 23 and 24 compared to the first year? We know that there was a lot of operator trouble, meaning Bird operates a model where they have local fleet managers that basically start a business in the town, and they are then responsible for maintaining half the fleet that they have. That didn't work out that worked out very, very well in 2022 for Bird. That didn't work out very well in 23. And mid-season, they had to make a shift and switch out one of their fleet managers, actually twice. They went from one to the second. The second didn't really work out very well. They went to the third. The third needed a little bit to get their feet wet. And by the time that that fleet manager got their feedback, they actually did pretty good. That manager was the only one who basically operated in Bend in 2024, which is also why we had less bikes deployed. And I think there's a correlation there to the less rides. What we have really, I think it's fair to say, what the data point that we really like is that we had the lowest amount of complaints in 2024 ever. So we had 29 measured complaints. And you'll see this on the next slide a little bit. We made the decision for 2024 that this is our year to really dive in, monitor more, take more of an active role in managing the program, overseeing it, so that we can get the data to really present to our city council. This is what we have learned. We feel we should continue. It's your decision, of course, to do that. But if we focus on compliance and digital data, and really to do that, I think we can have a solid program. That's what we did, and we feel that that is really the reason that we had so many less complaints, because we really focused on that. How did we do that? Well, I come to that in a second, but before I do that, trip data is something that we get now because we subscribed to a mobility manager, a digital software platform that gets us real-time data from all devices that are deployed in Bend 24/7. We can pull that at any time. We have access to that. We're not dependent on somebody else. Based on that, if you see this map, it might be small for you. I don't know how big your screen is. The darker the number, the more trips on a route. So you can clearly see that the majority of traffic and usage in 2024 was between downtown and then destination centers like the Old Mill, other like Century, like Galveston, all those areas. That's where the most of it happened, right? The peak times are interesting, because the peak times were fairly solid between 4 and 6 p.m., which is quite interesting. I think deserves a little bit more analysis in the future. But now, so if you have any questions on that, ask me later. I just want to get through this real quick, if that's okay. How did we monitor compliance? And this is something I think that we wanted to try this year, and it worked very well. So with the tool that we were using, we were able to create digital policies that the vendor had to follow. So we created a policy, for example, there was a 72-hour parking time limit. So if a bike was left outside a bike rack, it was only allowed to be there for 72 hours before it had to be addressed by the vendor. And we get daily reports via email to the city of Bend and to the operators that told them the list of bikes with their location, with their ID, so they could do this. And that helped a lot. If you see, for example, that the map that says bike parking, that's a screenshot that shows like dark black dots, and then it shows like circles. The dots is a bicycle or a device. The circle is actually every bike rack in the city of Bend that is a public bike rack, and some private ones, with a 10-foot buffer around it. So that's how that software knew if a bike is parked at a bike rack or outside. On the right, which also helped us, I think, with compliance, on the right, we created a Swiss cheese map of all ADA ramps that we had on an existing map at the city of Bend. And we created a policy that says, tell us if you have a bike parked within that circle, because then we need to report it to the operator. So that's why we had less complaints like this. We definitely still had instances where a bicycle blocked an ADA ramp. Not what we want, but with these tools that we used this year, we were able to tell the operator faster to react to it, and they were faster to respond to it and change it. So that's kind of like how we measured compliance, and I think we were able to react much faster, which is why we had less public complaints. What were lessons learned, good and bad? We feel we need to work on device selection. And now by now I can talk about this. City Council has agreed to continue the program with shared e-bikes. We are not going to do any other devices at this time, but we hope that we in the next 2 years can evaluate different devices. What do we mean? We definitely mean the S word. We think we need to evaluate scooters. I think there will be not only me, but a lot of people think that they could be very popular in Bend. But we don't want to leave it at that. I think we owe it to our community to also evaluate other devices like maybe pedal scooters, not e-scooters, or adaptable bikes. And I think that's something we really need to focus on to create a well-rounded and holistic program that really enables every community member to use it if they choose to want to. We know that compliance policies have made a difference, but we don't want to be satisfied with what we did. So we want to, for the future program, really evaluate how can we get even better on that one so that we can get the complaints as low as possible, because we feel if we have a good public acceptance of a program, then we might be able to expand it in the future. We know we need more device parking zones, and this is not only bike racks. It's as simple as marking striping on the ground in a right of way where we can by saying, hey, put a bike here, right? Even if there's no bike rack, so that it's out of the way, doesn't block a sidewalk, doesn't take any other value resources away. And again, using data and active enforcement, we feel this led to more compliance and we want to expand on that. But beyond that, I think what we have learned this year specifically is that by the third year, the fleet that is deployed in Bend, excuse my language, wasn't in a very, I want to say a different word, I'm not saying a bad word, but wasn't in great shape anymore. And that's something I think where we need to get better to hold the operator accountable through agreements with them, that we say, look, if you give 300 bikes to an operator and they can only use 100 of those and you expect them to invest into fixing the bikes that you gave them that were broken, that just is not okay with that, because that's not equitable, that's not fair. So we need to get better on that. And I think if we do that, then the fleet that we will have will be better, more operational, and more bikes can be deployed. More here, but those were the highlights. So what's next? We are in the process of developing a permanent shared micromobility program. The focus will continue to be on e-bikes, also pedal assist e-bikes. We hope that over the next couple of years, we can evaluate other devices like scooters, adaptable bikes, and then potentially propose a way or test a way how those can operate successfully in a city like Bend. But we do not have plans to bring those devices at all, for now. We want to expand access and locations to include more east side locations and work with partners like Community Options to identify areas in Bend where we can deploy bikes that might serve underserved communities and community members. Our timeline is, bless you, our timeline is aggressive a little bit. We want to launch again by Memorial Day weekend, which is usually the kickoff of the season. So we know that we have to do amendments to our municipal code, and we need to do an RFP most likely. So we're running these processes simultaneously. We have talked to a couple of vendors by now. They all feel very comfortable that they can meet that timeline if they would be selected. So that's all about bikes. I'm just going to move on real quick, and then if you have questions, write them down. You can ask me later. If that's okay, sorry.
That's fine.
Neighborhood mobility points. So we haven't really focused on this in 2024 with other projects, parking projects, a lot of other things going on. This took a little bit of a back burner. However, we have plans to expand locations in spring 2025. So we want to make some changes to neighborhood mobility points in downtown, and we are evaluating other areas like downtown, east side, southwest, and southeast area locations. The goal is to build 6 to 8 new mobility points, hopefully close to transit locations, so that we can connect that and expand access for people in those areas. And then closing this out with a carbon reduction program. So we are in the final stages with ODOT to hopefully be close to write an IGA. Our focus will be for now to create 2 mobility hubs or mobility points with the funding that we have. If we have money left over, we will look into doing pre-approved plan sets for mobility hubs, car share program, and expanding shared micromobility. The reason, I'll be very open and frank about that, I think the reason that we have kind of shifted this right now to the mobility point program is that we really hope to lock this in before spring 2025, mainly because I think there are some concerns with federal funding, what might happen to that next year. So we want to allocate that, and hopefully we'll be able to make adjustments as we go. With that, I can't really say we have some conversations. I see Bob Townsend is on the call here too. So we have some conversations about locations for the mobility hubs. There might be a downtown location, and then there might be an east side location that we're putting in this. We should know by next month, so I can provide an update via email to the policy board, and if you and others, if you choose to have that from me. With that, I think that's all I have. I can stop sharing, or if you have questions about the map or anything, I can leave it up.
Thanks, Toby. Questions?
Hi, Toby, thank you for that. Any operational changes that we can expect on Memorial Day, either in terms of additional bikes or different parking policies, apart from the expanded, locations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate it. I think that it's a two-leg approach for me. Like, as the one who manages the program, on one side, I'm like, I think it would be great if we can continue with the same vendor, because now we have a relationship and we know each other. We know like the people involved. That would be great. On the other side, it might be also interesting to find a different vendor that already has more devices and would bring them. That's one. But the general operational model, I think, will be very similar, with more focus on more deployment, more rebalancing based on what we have learned this year. A good example for that is, we know that the mobility point that we have at the South Marathon parking lot, Councilor Mendez and I could be there with a trailer full of bikes and deploy 10 bikes every hour, and they would be gone 15 minutes later. So we know that. And so those are the focuses that's what we want to focus on for the next season, because we know that's where the ridership comes from, right? And so I think, but generally, I think we would probably run about 80% the same model that we have done before, because it has proven to be successful for Bend.
Thank you.
Toby, congratulations. The shift in the complaints is truly remarkable. And I agree with you. In order to get the system where it's actually moving lots of people, there's just got to be better acceptance, fewer complaints. And so I just really think that number is where we get to be hopeful that we will continue to see success with this program. And I think it's great. I have noticed of my next door neighbor, there will be a bike right in front of that house. And it just makes me really happy that somebody's figured out how to use one of those to get to their home. I think that's interesting. I did not expect people to use them to get to their homes. I thought it would be from downtown to the old mill and back or something. So I think there's more to learn about what people are doing with them and where they want them to be. And I think it's a great program. I hope you are able to find, if it's not Bird, a different vendor, and great success.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I do think it's worth noting that I just personally, maybe that I shouldn't do this personally, but personally, I do think it's worth noting to thank you, Councilor Campbell, because I think in the past, you have really fought for us to be able to do that. In a way, I think you guys all know me by now good enough. I can say things a little bit weird. I think you have been going to bat for us a lot to actually make that happen. And I do owe you a big thank you for that.
Thanks, Toby. Appreciate it. Any other questions, comments for Toby? All right, that will move us along to other business. Anything you want to discuss here, or ideas for future meetings? Next meeting of the policy board is January 17th next year. Noon.
I would like to take a moment just to acknowledge Chair Campbell. On a personal note, I think that you are probably the one person that I have served with in more meetings than anybody else. We've had a lot of hours together, not only serving on the MPO policy board, but of course, city council, and attending lots of community events together, including the accessibility tour that we had together earlier. I think you and I were the only counselors present for that. And I feel like we've accomplished a lot together. I'm proud of what we've accomplished together, and personally, I feel like this has been a wonderful opportunity for me, and I think you're inseparable from that in my mind. I feel like I will always look back and we'll have had this time together that I think we used in a very productive way. So I'm very grateful for your service. Thank you.
Thank you, Ari. That's very nice. I appreciate it. All right.
I want to say thank you. Wow. Yeah, I mean, Barb's been here for 10 years, so it's been, she has seen, I think, some huge changes in the MPO over that time. And, and I think really moving the MPO towards more of the board moving the board towards a much more active role. I think we've had the history of the MPO here was we've had, very passive boards historically, and asked MPO staff to do as little as possible, to whatever was required, do that and no more. And I think, we've seen this transformation, with Barb pushing us to be, changing the way we allocate some of our funding, to be more engaged, and be just, out there and really pushing on, trying to help improve our transportation system in a lot of different ways. So
Thank you, Tyler. I appreciate that. Yeah, when I started, there were two of us, and the other person said to me, well, why don't we just go to every other meeting? I'll do one, which is obviously means neither of us is actually going to know what's going on. Neither of us, this is entirely a plan for rubber stamping. But no, that literally was the attitude when I got on is, oh, we have to do this thing. Somebody's got to show up once a month. We can take turns. Like, wait. Doesn't that mean a waste of time for both of us? So thank you, Tyler. I appreciate it.
Andrea's not here today, but she had the idea of giving you, an MPO Oscar for your time. And we have a card as well, but we will get that to you next week. So.
There it is. That is fabulous. Thank you so much. It really has just been such an honor. I do think we have accomplished lots of really good things with the MPO and with COACT as well.
Yes.
Cooperating a lot with COACT, which has also been another organization that, depending on who's there, can be either here's another report we have to listen to, or wait, you mean there's a little bit of money? So I hope that you continue to be challenged by the board and find out all the things we can do to help people. Thanks. Thanks, guys. Public comments?
Loved working with you, Barb.
Hey, you too, Chris.
Miss your energy.
Yeah, oh, you too, Chris. You always have such a great sense of humor, and I appreciate that, and just so much knowledge. Yeah, I know you're gonna keep building good things. I'm sorry, I just heard, you can't build anything, but you're gonna take care of everything.
Well, as we say at the road department, we'll see you down the road.
There you are. That's it. Thanks, Chris. I think that means we're adjourned.